Well, the time has come for me to release my official March Madness predictions for the 2026 NCAA Tournament, and we have less than 24 hours until the games officially tip off, and I am so excited for the madness to get underway. But before we get into the bracket, I wanted to give a quick shout out to the sponsor of this video, Kalshi. And Kalshi is the largest prediction market in the US, and with Kalshi, you can trade against your peers rather than a sportsbook all tournament long, and it's available in all 50 states. And Kalshi just announced their $1 billion perfect bracket contest, and it's free to enter. And if you don't predict every game correctly, Kalshi is still giving away $1 million to the top scoring bracket. So if you're interested in signing up for Kalshi before the madness begins, make sure to use code TBN at the link in the description. But now, let's jump into the bracket. All right, we're going to start off in the East region like we normally do, where we see the #1 overall seed in the NCAA Tournament, the Duke Blue Devils, going up against Siena. And I'm not going to waste too much time. Give me the Blue Devils to advance to the round of 32. Then we have Ohio State taking on TCU, and this is the first game of the entire NCAA tournament. There Thursday morning, getting us tipped off. We have Bruce Thornton and Ohio State Buckeyes going up against TCU with David Punch, and this game has been back and forth for me since the bracket has been released. I really like TCU on the defensive end with guys like David Punch and Edmonds there. They have good guard play as well from Brock Harding and others, but this Ohio State team is going to have the best player in this game on their team, and that's Bruce Thornton. You also have a guy like John Mobley Jr., who just feels like he's built for March. I think Devin Royal is going to be big for the Buckeyes as well, and then Christoph Tilley is going to be the X factor, but I do think the Buckeyes get enough with the offense of their backcourt, so I'm going with the Buckeyes to advance to face Duke in the round of 32. Then we have St. John's taking on Northern Iowa, and I could see this game being very gritty. Northern Iowa, a really good defensive team. Trey Campbell is the guy you need to know from this Northern Iowa squad. He could have a breakout game in this one, but obviously going up against the St. John's team that is one of the hottest teams in the country, coming off of a Big East title where they absolutely dominated UConn in that one. I think Rick Pitino gets back to the round of 32, so give me St. John's. Then we have Kansas going up against Cal Baptist, and this is another one where I could see it being interesting down the stretch. Dominique Daniels is a really good guard for this Cal Baptist Lancers squad, but obviously the best player on this one is going to be Darren Peterson there for the Kansas Jayhawks, and I just keep going back to the thought of Darren Peterson could have a huge impact not only in this one, but in Kansas's ability to make a run in the NCAA tournament. So although there's a possibility for an upset, I think the talent overall that this Kansas Jayhawks team has, not only in Darren Peterson, but also in guys like Flory Badunga, Melvin Council Jr., and Trey White, they've all come up big when Darren Peterson has been out, and now that he's in, as long as that chemistry is there from the group, they definitely have the pieces to beat Cal Baptist and get to the next round. So I got Bill Self and the Jayhawks advancing in that one. Then we have Louisville taking on South Florida, and this is one of the hottest upset picks out of probably everyone's brackets, and I'm right there with them. I picked it in my initial one, and I'm staying with it. South Florida is going to beat Louisville. We just learned Michael Brown Jr. not going to play in this first round matchup, and if they somehow beat South Florida, it's likely that he's going to be out in the round of 32 as well. So that makes me comfortable taking South Florida, because even though if Louisville were to get the win, I do think they lose to Michigan State, especially without Michael Brown Jr. But I do think South Florida is going to be the team that pulls off the first upset of the tournament, so I got the Bulls advancing. Then Michigan State taking on North Dakota State, and I think in this one, Michigan State didn't have the best Big Ten tournament, got bounced a little earlier than I was expecting, but they have one of the best guards in the entire country in Jeremy Fears Jr. I think the front line of Jackson Kohler and Carson Cooper would be huge in this matchup against a North Dakota State team that doesn't really scare me on the offensive end, so I got Michigan State to move on. UCLA going up against UCF. This is going to be a really good game as well. Johnny Dawkins' squad there for Central Florida has picked up some really big wins on the season. They've beat Kansas. They've beat Texas Tech. They have a really good backcourt with Themis Folks and Riley Kugel, but they're going up against a UCLA team that is peaking at the right time. Had a little bit of a slower start to the year, but still played really well against some quality competition, even though they weren't able to pick up those wins like Arizona in the non-conference. But Donovan Dent has been getting better and better throughout the season. Tyler Bilodeau, Sky Clark, Eric Daly Jr., Perry, they're all ready to go, it seems. And so I got Mick Cronin and the Bruins getting the win there. Then UConn taking on Furman. This is a game that I've mentioned that I'm interested in picking the upset. I think Furman is way better than a 15 seed. Honestly, they're more like a 13 seed to me. Cooper Bowser is a really good post player that they have. Alex Wilkins is another one of those mid-major guards that could be in for a breakout in the tournament. And if they were to get the win, it'd be because of those two guys. But I can't pick against Danny Hurley and the UConn Huskies. They have too much talent, too much shooting, so I have UConn advancing in this one. Then jumping back to the top is where we got Duke taking on Ohio State. And this is where I'm interested to see if Patrick Ngungba is going to be back. I don't think he plays in that round of 64 matchup for Duke against Siena. But if he's not back for the round of 32, Duke can definitely win, and I still have them winning, so I'm going to go ahead and advance the Blue Devils. But this is going to be a really tough matchup without Ngungba. I think Ohio State has a lot of talent. They probably have the better backcourt with Bruce Thornton and John Mobley Jr., but obviously Duke has Cameron Boozer, the National Player of the Year, and I'm not sure anyone on the Buckeyes could lock him up. So I have Duke advancing to my Sweet 16. Then we get to St. John's and Kansas. As I mentioned, St. John's playing some really good basketball right now, but don't shoot the three ball well. That does concern me a bit. Going up against a Kansas team that we've seen at times play some really good defense. Flory Badunga down there in the paint, as well as Bryson Tiller, would be huge in this matchup against St. John's frontcourt of Zuby Ejiofor, Bryce Hopkins, and Dylan Mitchell. This is another game, kind of like the Ohio State TCU one, where I'm really back and forth. Two great coaches in Bill Self for Kansas and Rick Pitino for St. John's. But I think ultimately St. John's is playing the better basketball at this time. So I'm going with the Johnnies to advance. Then we have South Florida going up against Michigan State. And this is another one of those upsets where I think it could happen, but I just don't have enough confidence to pick it in my bracket. I think Michigan State was one of the top 3 Big Ten teams this season under Tom Izzo, and I believe Jeremy Fears Jr. leads this team to a Sweet 16, so I got Michigan State advancing. Then we have UCLA and UConn, and this might be one of the most interesting games in the second round for me. We saw UCLA get a big win over Illinois there at the end of the regular season, and I feel like that has really catapulted this Bruins team to having more confidence heading into the postseason. They played well in the Big Ten tournament, and then now heading into a matchup with UConn, who I think isn't trending in the right direction, even though they've had a really great season still in terms of their record. They weren't as dominant in the Big East as I thought they would be. UCLA has the talent to match UConn, and if they have an off shooting night, I think the Bruins can get the win. So I'm going to go ahead and pick UCLA to get the upset over UConn, and they move on to the second weekend. Then we have Duke taking on St. John's in our first matchup in the Sweet 16 there in the East region. And if Duke's not ready for this one, watch out, because St. John's definitely can get the win. But I do think by the Sweet 16, Patrick Ngungba is going to be back for this Blue Devils team, and that's going to be huge for them. I think with Ngungba, the front court of him and Cameron Boozer, as well as Malik Brown when he comes in, has the edge over a really good front court that St. John's has. And then I don't trust St. John's backcourt, and I do like Duke, especially with a guy like Isaiah Evans, who has kind of become the Robin to Cameron Boozer's Batman there for the Duke Blue Devils. I think Duke, even with the injuries, gets to the Elite Eight, and then they're going up against either Michigan State or UCLA. We saw UCLA knock off Michigan State here recently, but I got Michigan State getting the win and advancing to the Elite Eight. And now we have a Duke-Michigan State rematch there in the Elite Eight. Win their last one, Duke went on the road to Michigan State and knocked off the Spartans. Could Caleb Foster be back at this point? I don't think so. I think his earliest return has been rumored to be the Final Four if Duke is able to get there, but I still don't think that stops John Shire and the Blue Devils. I have that much confidence in Duke to get to the Final Four, so give me the Blue Devils to advance over Michigan State. But moving on down to the South region, this is where we have the Florida Gators as our 1 seed, and they're taking on either Prairie View or Lehigh, and it doesn't matter. The Gators are getting the win there. Then they go up against either Clemson or Iowa in the second round. But in that first round matchup between the Tigers and the Hawkeyes, you have Clemson, who definitely wants to play in the post. They have guys like RJ Godfrey, Carter Whaling. And then for Iowa, though, they have the best player in the game in Bennett Sturts. And we saw him and Ben McCollum do it last year with Drake winning in the first round. And I think the Iowa Hawkeyes are able to get the win and advance to the round of 32. Then Vanderbilt going up against McNeese. McNeese was able to knock off Clemson last year in the first round and then make it to a second round game against Purdue. And that's where the McNeese Cowboys ultimately fell. But in this one, I don't think McNeese, with their new head coach and new team, is going to beat a very hot Vanderbilt team that just came from the SEC title game where they ended up losing to Arkansas. But this team, they had a little bit of a lull there in the middle of the season when Duke Miles got injured. But now with him back and the way that him and Tyler Tanner have that backcourt going, as well as Devin McLaughlin, Tyler Nickel, and all those other pieces that Mark Byington has on this Commodores team, I can't see Vanderbilt losing to McNeese. So give me the Commodores. Then Nebraska going up against Troy. Troy is a really trendy upset pick right now as well. And we know that Nebraska has never won a game in the NCAA tournament, but that stops this season. I have the Cornhuskers and Fred Hoiberg getting Nebraska's first ever win in March Madness and advancing to the round of 32. I like Troy, and I like those wings of Victor Valdez and Thomas Dowd, as well as the Campbell brothers in the backcourt, but Nebraska has the best shooter in the game in Price Stanford. Then you also have a Rink Mass down low, a Sam Hoiberg, or Jamarcus Lawrence. I just really like the pieces that Fred Hoiberg has put together on this Nebraska Cornhuskers team, and I think they're destined to at least get one win in this NCAA tournament. Then North Carolina taking on VCU. Give me the Rams. Terrence Hill Jr., Lazar Djokovic, these two guys are going to lead this Rams team to a win over North Carolina. Also, we know North Carolina doesn't have Caleb Wilson. He is out for the NCAA tournament, so that is a big hit to the Tar Heels and what they like to do. And since he's been out, their turnovers are up. They're not as good on the offensive or defensive end, and we know with VCU, they take care of the ball, but they also force turnovers, and this team has been shooting lights out en route to winning the A-10. I got the Rams getting the upset over the Tar Heels. Then Illinois going up against Penn. Illinois is going to have to watch out for a guy like TJ Power there for Penn, who went off in the Ivy League tournament, but we know Illinois has one of the best offenses in the entire country, and although it hasn't been as good as of late for the Illini, this is still a really good team that has a really good coach in Brad Underwood, and I can't see this Illini team losing in the first round, so I got Illinois advancing. Then St. Mary's going up against Texas A&M, and these are just two drastically different teams in terms of what they want to do in a game. St. Mary's, they slow it down and play at their speed and don't really let teams speed them up, and they're going up against a Texas A&M team that's exactly what they want to do. Obviously, Texas A&M, coached by Bucky McMillan, they play Bucky ball. They get after you and get out in transition, but this St. Mary's team has really good guys in the backcourt in Joshua Dent and Mikey Lewis, and don't forget about a guy like Paulius Morauskas. St. Mary's has a really good team there under Randy Bennett, and I think they're just well coached and very disciplined, and Texas A&M isn't going to be able to affect them. So I got St. Mary's getting a win in a grinded out type of game. And then we got Houston going up against Idaho, and sorry for the Vandals, they don't have a shot. Give me Houston to win in that matchup. Now jumping back to the top of the South region here for the round of 32, Florida going up against Iowa. I got the Gators. That front court just has too many pieces, and I don't think Iowa has anybody that's going to be able to stop the likes of Ruben Chinyelu and Alex Condon. Then we have Vanderbilt going up against Nebraska. Nebraska obviously the higher seed, but I think Vanderbilt was underseeded in this tournament. Right now, they're playing more like a 3 or a 4 seed, and they have the talent to back that up as well. And seeing who is going to be the opponent in the next round, I feel like we're destined for a rematch of Vanderbilt versus Florida. So I have the Commodores beating Nebraska in a close one, but I do like Vanderbilt in that matchup. Then VCU going up against Illinois. I feel like Illinois is kind of being slept on right now in this region. I feel like everybody's talking about Florida, Vanderbilt, and Houston, but Illinois, if we remember, they were playing some of their best basketball there in the middle of the season, and I think Keaton Wagler and the Fighting Illini are going to get back there. I have Illinois beating VCU to head to the Sweet 16. Then we have Houston and St. Mary's. In Houston, they just have the better backcourt with Kingston Flemings, Milos Uzan, and Emmanuel Sharp. And Kelvin Sampson is going to be on a revenge tour trying to get back to the Final Four where they lost in the championship game last year. So I got Houston beating St. Mary's and advancing to the second weekend. Now we have Florida and Vanderbilt, and then Illinois and Houston in our Sweet 16. And in that first matchup of Florida and Vanderbilt, they split the season series where Florida won on the road at Vanderbilt, and then obviously Vanderbilt knocked off the Gators in the SEC tournament. And the biggest question for me in this matchup is, how is that guard play going to be for Florida? If Xavier Lee and Boogie Flan play like they have been recently outside of the SEC tournament, I think Florida is one of the favorites, not only to win in this game, but obviously to get out of this region. But if not, it's a completely different story. But honestly, I think the loss that they took in the SEC tournament might have actually been a good thing for this Gators team because of how well they had been playing over the past couple of months. I think that really was a wake-up call for the Gators, and I don't think they get knocked off twice by Vanderbilt. So I got Florida into my Elite Eight, and they'll be going up against either Illinois or Houston. And now with Houston getting to the Sweet 16 in this region, Houston would be playing in Houston. So basically a home game for the Cougars, and that's going to be a tall task for this Illinois Fighting Illini team. But I am going to be picking Illinois in this matchup. I think the offense that Illinois has is one that could be tough for a Houston team to guard, and that's mainly because these bigs of Zvonimir Visic, Tomislav Visic, and David Mirkovic, they can all stretch you out and shoot the three, which is going to pull guys like Chris Sinak and JoJo Tugler away from the rim, which is going to open driving lanes for a Kylan Boswell and Andreas Stojakovic, Keaton Wagler, and the rest of this group. I really like this Illinois team, and I think people are sleeping on them. And so I got Illinois getting the upset over Houston in Houston and advancing to the Elite Eight, where they're going up against Florida. And in this matchup, Illinois is definitely going to have all that they can handle with this Florida front court. But I do think there is a scenario where Illinois, if those bigs can lock down and try and limit the offensive rebounds, I believe Illinois has a good enough offense to get past Florida. So I'm going to be picking another upset with Illinois getting the win over Florida and advancing to the Final Four. And Illinois only has a 21% chance to make it to the Final Four right now on Kalshi, which I think is some great value. But let's stay at the bottom of the bracket and start there with the Midwest region, where we see the Michigan Wolverines as the number 1 overall seed. And in their first round matchup, they're going up against Howard. And Howard just won in their first 4 matchup against UMBC, but Michigan obviously going to get the win in this one. Then we got Georgia going up against St. Louis. Georgia, we know their offense is really fast-paced, get out, shoot a lot. I think a guy like Kanan Catchings could be an X factor for this Bulldogs team alongside their really good backcourt of Blue Kane and Jeremiah Wilkinson. But going up against a St. Louis team that has Robbie Avila, you also have Shawarma and a bunch of other guys that can shoot the ball. I really like Josh Schertz's St. Louis squad. I think they definitely slowed down a bit there at the end of the season, but got off to a great start. And I believe St. Louis is destined to get at least one win in this NCAA tournament. So give me St. Louis to advance. Then we got Texas Tech taking on Akron. Texas Tech no longer has JT Toppin. He is out for the season. You also have a Christian Anderson coming off of a bit of a groin injury as well. If these guys around Christian Anderson don't step up and can't hit their shots, then I think Texas Tech is definitely able to lose this one against a really good Akron team that just won the MAC. You got a Tavari Johnson. They're averaging over 20 points in the backcourt. Amani Lyles, a really good front court piece for this Zip squad. I'm picking the upset. I got Akron beating Texas Tech and getting to the second weekend. Then we have Alabama going up against Hofstra. Cruz Davis and Preston Edney, 2 breakout candidates there for the Hofstra Pride in the backcourt. But Alabama, we know right now with what's going on with their program around Aiden Holloway, who I'm guessing is not going to be available in this one, or maybe not available in the entire NCAA tournament, that definitely has changed my mind a bit. But I am sticking with Alabama. I think this offense, even without Aiden Holloway, is just too lethal. It can go on runs that would absolutely sink a Hofstra team at times. They also have the best player in the game in LeBaron Philon on their team, and I believe he's going to will this team to a win over Hofstra. Then we have Tennessee going up against either Miami, Ohio, or SMU, and truly, I don't think it matters who Tennessee plays. I think the Volunteers are getting the win in the first round here against either of these teams. Then Virginia and Wright State. Virginia right now is one of my favorite teams with how they're playing. They barely lost to Duke in the ACC championship game, and they just have a really good squad that Ryan Odom has put together. I like their backcourt of Chance Mallory and Dallin Hall. I like the wings with Jakari White, Malik Thomas, and then the bigs of Tyster Ritter and Johan Grunlow. This Virginia team, we know previously, was really defensive-minded under Tony Bennett, but now that Ryan Odom's here, they're more well-balanced, and I think that limits the upset potential that a team like Wright State could have on them. So I'm going with Virginia to get the win. Then we have Kentucky taking on Santa Clara, and Santa Clara got in with an at-large bid, making it to the WCC championship game after beating St. Mary's in the semifinals, but ultimately losing to Gonzaga there. You got a guy like Alan Graves and Elijah Mahi there on the wings in the forward position. I really like this Santa Clara team, think they can shoot the ball well from the backcourt also, but I'm going with Kentucky and Mark Pope. I just trust the talent a bit more that Mark Pope has, and although it's been a disappointing season, I do think the Kentucky Wildcats at least get one win in the NCAA tournament, but then they're taking on either Iowa State or Tennessee State, and I got the Cyclones advancing in that matchup to go to the round of 32. Then jumping back to the top of the Midwest region here in the round of 32, Michigan going up against St. Louis. I like Robbie Avila for St. Louis there at the center position, but he does not stand a chance against this Michigan front court of Yaxel Lindenborg, Morez Johnson Jr., and Ade Mara. Just too big and strong there from Michigan. I think that's going to push them into the Sweet 16. Next, we have Akron going up against Alabama, and Alabama, like I mentioned, going to be without Aiden Holloway. So Akron definitely could be a pick to make it to the Sweet 16. But even without Aiden Holloway, I trust Nate Oates. This team has had success in tournaments in the years past, and I think LeBaron Philon and a guy like Latrell Reitzel definitely could step up there in the backcourt. We know they have a ton of guards, a ton of guys that can do a lot of different things. I love Amari Allen on the wing. You got Taylor Bolin, Aiden Terrell down in the paint. I think Alabama still gets it done and gets to the second weekend. Then Tennessee going up against Virginia. This Virginia team was one of my favorites in my initial bracket. I had them going to the Elite Eight, but the more and more I think about this matchup, the more and more I think that this could go in favor of Tennessee. Obviously, you have really good guard play there for the Volunteers with the Jacoby Gillespie. You got the upside of Nate Ament, and I think that's going to be the biggest X factor in this game is what version of Nate Ament do we get coming up against Virginia. But then in the paint, they got a defensive stopper in Felix Okpara. And the more and more I talk about it, the more I like Tennessee, but I'm going to stick with my original gut and go with Virginia to get the win in this matchup. I think Ryan Odom's squad has been solid all season long, maybe one of the more underrated top 3 seeds in this tournament, and I do believe they have Final Four dark horse potential, so I'm at least going to have them getting to the second weekend. But now we have Kentucky going up against Iowa State in our last game of the round of 32 here in the Midwest region, and I had Kentucky winning over Santa Clara, and I'm not 100% confident in that one, so there is no way that I'm picking Kentucky over Iowa State. This Iowa State team has senior leadership in Taman Lipsey and Joshua Jefferson. It has maybe the best shooter in all of college basketball in Milan Momcilovic. It added a high-impact transfer there in the paint with Blake Buchanan, and then you got the defensive lockdown freshman in Killian Torrey. I love TJ Altenberger in this Iowa State squad, so I have the Cyclones advancing. Then in this region. I know it's chalk 1, 2, 3, and 4, but Michigan going up against Alabama. This is where Alabama's run comes to an end. I got Michigan advancing. The Crimson Tide definitely could get hot, hit a lot of shots, and then end up knocking off Michigan in this one, but I don't think that's very likely. And Michigan has showed at times that this offense can be one of the best in the country as well, and I think the size that Michigan has, especially in that front court, is going to give trouble to a team like Alabama that we know doesn't have the best front court. So I got the Wolverines getting to the Elite Eight, and they're going up against either Virginia or Iowa State. And like I mentioned, I had Virginia getting to the Elite Eight in my last bracket, but this time I'm going with Iowa State. The more I look at this matchup, the more and more I like the Cyclones. I think this team we know on the defensive end is great. It's Iowa State, and that's what TJ Altenberger and the Cyclones do. But their offensive game is even better this season than it has been in years past. And I think this team is headed to an Elite Eight matchup with Michigan. So now with Michigan and Iowa State as our two Elite Eight teams, I think this would be one of the best games of the entire tournament. We saw Iowa State go down to the wire against Arizona in the Big 12 semifinals, where they were a Jaden Bradley shot away from maybe winning that game and winning the Big 12 tournament. But they're going up against a Michigan team that has just as good, maybe an even better front court than what Arizona has. The guard play, though, is definitely goes in Iowa State's favor. I'm nervous about that LJ Kaysen injury. I think that could really hurt Michigan and their ceiling, but I'm still picking Dusty May and the Wolverines, who has the best chance of making it to the Final Four, according to Kalshi, at 54%, to at least get to a Final Four and get out of the Midwest region. And now for our last region, we have the West region, where the Arizona Wildcats are the #1 overall seed, and they're going up against Long Island in the first round. And just like the others, I got Arizona advancing, no question there. Then we have Villanova going up against Utah State. Villanova kind of struggling a bit there to end the season. Didn't make it as far in the Big East tournament as I thought they would. And they're going up against a Utah State team that has an MJ Collins in the backcourt, Mason Falslev there on the wing. And this Utah State team is even favored as a 9 seed over an 8 seed. So it's no surprise I'm going with the Aggies, Mountain West champs for a reason. And they're getting to the round of 32 matchup with Arizona. Then we got Wisconsin taking on High Point, and I really like High Point. One of the teams I was looking at maybe picking as an upset pick, but they're going up against a team that is way too hot right now in the Wisconsin Badgers. They played Michigan so close in that Big Ten tournament, had a chance to win, but ultimately weren't able to pull it out. But they have a backcourt in Nick Boyd and John Blackwell. That's going to be too much for the High Point Panthers. Also, I believe Nolan Winter is going to be back for the NCAA tournament, which just gives them another weapon that they can go to in the front court. So give me Wisconsin to advance in that one. And then we have Arkansas taking on Hawaii. And I think the defensive principles that Hawaii plays by are just not going to bode well in this matchup. Hawaii plays this no-switch defense, and they're going up against a team in the Arkansas Razorbacks that has a guy in Darius Acuff, who is probably the best guard in the country at this point with the way he has played. No one's going to be able to stop him one-on-one. So I believe Arkansas is going to win this game. For that reason, also, just the talent gap between these two teams is so large. I got the Razorbacks advancing. Then we have BYU and Texas. Texas able to pull out the last second win over NC State in that first 4 matchup, and they're going up against a BYU team that they're definitely able to beat without Richie Saunders. This team did struggle to end the regular season there once Richie Saunders went down, but ultimately BYU has a guy in AJ DeBansa that they're able to lean on, leads the nation in scoring. You also have the point guard of Robert Wright there for BYU. I think the biggest question and X factor for this Cougars team is going to be Kennard Davis. Is he able to replicate the kind of scoring that we've seen from him in previous years? But now, obviously, with BYU, he's kind of had a different role. But with Richie Saunders out, he's going to step back into that scoring role. If he can be the third option for this BYU team, they have a chance to make a little bit of a run. I truly believe that. And I think they at least get the win over Texas. So I got BYU advancing in that one. Then we have Gonzaga going up against Kennesaw State. Gonzaga winning the WCC tournament. Not sure about Braden Huff's injury status. It mentioned that he was jogging now, but my prediction is he won't be back at least in that first weekend of the NCAA tournament. So I think they're going to have to play this game and the next without Huff. But still, you got a guy in Graham Ike who's going to be able to dominate in the paint against this Kennesaw State team. Also, Mario St. Superi, the way he played in the WCC tournament was absolutely incredible. They have guys that have been here before in a Tyon Grant Foster, and they have really good pieces around him. I think Gonzaga gets this win in the first round and advances to the round of 32. Then we have Miami going up against Missouri, and this game is kind of similar to what I was mentioning with Houston in their Sweet 16 and Elite 8 matchups, and that is the fact that Missouri is going to be playing in St. Louis, so it's basically going to be a home game for the 10 seed over the 7-seeded Miami Hurricanes, but Miami has the better player in this matchup. I do believe that with Malik Reneau. He has kind of found himself here with Jay Lucas and the Hurricanes after transferring in from Indiana this past season, and I also like the front court mate that he has in Ernest Uday. They got the backcourt of Trey Donaldson, True Washington, and then the two freshmen of Shelton Henderson and Dante Allen. I think this Miami team is a pretty complete team, and in Jay Lucas's first year as the head coach, they get a win in the NCAA tournament and get to the second round, and they'll be going up against Purdue, who's going to knock off Queens after winning the Big Ten tournament. And the Boilermakers are looking like they're hitting their stride at the perfect time here in the NCAA tournament. Now we got Arizona going up against Utah State, and Arizona, that front court, just going to be too much for Utah State. I think Utah State definitely has a good backcourt and good wing play with MJ Collins and Mason Falslev, like I mentioned before, but the front court of Mo Krivas, Toby Awaka, and Koa Pete is going to dominate what Utah State has on the interior. So I got Arizona, the most complete team, making it to the Sweet 16, and they're going up against either Arkansas or Wisconsin, and this might be my favorite matchup of the round of 32 because you have two great backcourts in Darius Acuff and Malik Thomas for the Razorbacks, and then John Blackwell and Nick Boyd for the Wisconsin Badgers. But I think Trevin Brazile is going to be a big one in this one, as well as Billy Richmond. I think these two guys might have an opportunity to take over in this game, and ultimately it's going to be whether or not Arkansas's defense can stop Wisconsin, because we know Arkansas is going to be able to score, and I think their defense does just enough, and then at the end, if they need it, Darius Acuff and his heroics can come out. So I got the Razorbacks advancing to my Sweet 16. Then we got Gonzaga going up against BYU, and if BYU had Richie Saunders, I definitely would be picking the Cougars in this matchup, but no Richie Saunders, I think, is going to hurt them a lot. If the Zags are able to put a guy like Innocenti on AJ Dubanta, and if he can just contain him a bit, I think Gonzaga is going to have their way, especially in the interior with Graham Ike. I think he's going to be able to play really well, even against a guy like Keba Keita. So I like the Zags in this matchup. And then in our final game of the round of 32, it's Miami going up against Purdue. And Purdue, like I mentioned, is hitting their stride at the perfect time. Braden Smith, Fletcher Lawyer, and Trey Kaufman have been in this position before, and they're going to get Matt Painter and the Boilermakers to the second weekend. And so in my first Sweet 16 matchup between Arizona and Arkansas, when I originally predicted this, I had Arkansas winning, and that's truly because of a guy like Darius Acuff. But the more and more I look at it, Arizona is just such a complete team. They have weapons all over the floor, and they're really hard to get away from right now for me. And I think these one seeds have just been so dominant all season long that it just feels like they're destined to make it far in this bracket. So I do have Arizona now beating Arkansas in a very close game to advance to the Elite Eight, and then they'll be going up against either Gonzaga or Purdue, and this is where the Zags run comes to the end. They get back to the Sweet 16 after missing it last season, but the experience of Purdue gets the most of them, and we got Arizona and Purdue there in my Elite Eight out of the West region. And now this game is probably the toughest game for me to pick because you got two very different storylines. Arizona has been dominant all season long, basically just lost those two games in the middle of the year, and that was it. And they're going up against a Purdue team that came in with extremely high expectations, the preseason #1 team in the country, but then definitely didn't perform as well as we thought they would, but now hitting their stride at the perfect time and got themselves to a 2 seed, and now they're in a matchup with Arizona. And you know what? Because Purdue has been here before, I'm gonna go with the Boilermakers to get the win over Arizona. I think the experience of Braden Smith and Fletcher Loyer in the backcourt, as well as Trey Kaufman-Renn, and then a guy in Oscar Clough who has been playing really good. He played awesome in that game against Michigan. I think they have a shot to slow down that front court, and they have the ability to shoot it more from deep, and I think Arizona's lack of shooting three-pointers could hurt them in this matchup. So I'm going to go with Purdue, who has a 22% of making it to the Final Four according to Kalshi, beating Arizona in the Elite Eight and advancing to the Final Four. So moving on to my Final Four, we have Duke taking on Illinois, and then Purdue going up against Michigan. In my first matchup, we got Duke going up against Illinois, and in this one, I think the biggest question is, does Illinois have anyone to stop the National Player of the Year in Cameron Boozer? And my answer to that is no. I think Cameron Boozer could absolutely feast against this Illinois Fighting Illini team. He's just too dynamic on the offensive end. He can score inside. He can stretch you out. At times in the ACC tournament, they were putting him as the primary ball handler and forcing those bigs to come out and guard him, and I think they could do the same thing against Illinois, and he'd be able to get whatever he wants. Also, Patrick Ngungba is going to be back. There's a possibility that Caleb Foster is back, but if not, Caden Boozer is a guy that I truly believe can step up and at least just be a facilitator and get other guys the basketball where they need to be. Isaiah Evans has been playing awesome, shooting the ball well. Then you got guys coming off the bench like a Malik Brown, a Darren Harris, a Nicholas Haminia. This Duke team has so many weapons, and I think they get the win over Illinois. And they're going up against Purdue or Michigan, and obviously this is a rematch of the Big Ten title game where we saw Purdue get the win over Michigan in their second matchup. In that first one is where we saw Michigan go on the road and beat Purdue, but I think this is where the injury to LJ Kaysen really catches up to the Michigan Wolverines. Elliot Cadeau is going to have to play heavy minutes, but they're missing some scoring there on the offensive end without LJ Kaysen. And Purdue's bigs showed that they're going to be able to keep up with Michigan's front court, and I think Braden Smith and Fletcher Loyer have huge games in this one and help lead the Boilermakers to a win against Michigan once again and advance to the Final Four, where we see Duke taking on Purdue in the national championship. And this is going to be Purdue's last chance with Braden Smith and Fletcher Loyer and Trey Kaufman-Renn to try and win it all there with Matt Painter, and unfortunately they don't do it. I'm sticking with the Duke Blue Devils even around all of the injuries to get the win over Purdue and get John Shire's first ever national championship, and I think Cameron Boozer is going to lead this team to that this season. So give me Duke, who have a 20% chance to win on Kalshi to win it all in 2026. But that wraps it up in this one. Let me know your thoughts on my official March Madness predictions in the comments down below. Also, let me know who your Final Four is and who your national champion is in your bracket. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.